Thank you guys all for coming tonight. So, I want to give you guys a quick little introduction about my background before we jump into our first meeting tonight. So, I want to thank you guys again for taking the time to come on Zoom and listen to my little sports psych spiel. I have 2 degrees in sports psych. I've been working in sports psych for the last 3.5 years, but I've been studying sports psych for the last 6+ years. I got my bachelor's degree in sport and exercise psychology with a minor in scholastic coaching at West Virginia University. And then I ventured over to Massachusetts to get my master's in sport and exercise psychology. I just graduated a couple months ago. So I've been working as a mental performance coach along with a squash coach, thanks to Coach Paul, for the last few months since I've graduated. And before that, I've done work with collegiate athletes. I've done work with from D1 to D3, done work with people as young as 8 to as old as 25, sports from squash, tennis, cheerleading, gymnastics from all different levels. So I'm excited to be able to use my background in squash to be able to combine that with my background in sports psych because people don't understand just how much that mental piece really matters when it comes to squash. So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen so we can hop into the presentation. All right. So I just wanted to do my first one on something that I know a lot of people can relate to, which is just trying to manage pressure, anxiety, and stress in a competitive setting. So stress and pressure is something that a lot of not only elite squash players can relate to, but any level squash players, whether they're starting, especially ones that are just entering their first couple tournaments. And it looks different from player to player, no matter the level. So just want to go over what competitive pressure initially is first. So it's just what an athlete perceives their certain situation to be in a sports setting. And it can be mild pressure they're feeling or anxiety all the way to extreme. And it can make it very difficult for them to perform, and which brings upon pre-performance anxiety. And depending on how important the competition is, will determine how much pressure they're feeling or how much anxiety they're feeling in that setting. So the sources of competitive pressure or stress and anxiety are usually coaches, family, friends, their own expectations of themselves, the importance of the competition, and then what the competition demands from them. And some people suffer from more than one, some people suffer from all four. But typically, it's usually the stress of the expectations they put on themselves and what they think their family, friends, or coaches are expecting from them. So when we're talking about competitive pressure, we're gonna inherently talk about stress and anxiety as well. So within sports psych, we talk about two different types of anxiety. So we have state anxiety and trait anxiety. So state is just, how you feel in that moment. It could be fleeting, it usually is, and it usually only occurs in a highly stressful situation that has a lot riding on the outcome. And then trait anxiety is more a personality characteristic, and it's something that's more chronic. So it develops over time. It's not fleeting. It's stays with them, whether it's in a competition setting or in their daily life. And most athletes, they typically suffer from what we call CTA, which is just competitive trait anxiety, which is kind of a combination of both state and trait. So it usually only happens in a competitive sports setting, but it's every time before that. So every time before they go to perform in that setting, they're riddled with anxiety. So what does it look like? Because, I mentioned before, it looks different from person to person. So we usually have physiological and mental kind of symptoms when it comes to anxiety and pressure. So a lot of people, you may see them sweating, people who pace a lot, people get really jittery, bite their nails, people disappear right up until their match starts. A lot of people cry, a lot of people throw up. And then mentally, you see some people shut down. They don't want to be bothered. They don't want anyone talking to them right before. They start to spin out and psych themselves out. They start going through different scenarios in their brain of what the outcome of the match could be. And then a lot of people end up with a very defeated attitude at the end of the day with it. So performance anxiety usually have both physiological and psychological symptoms in response to that pressure. But again, it's not one size fit all. Everyone's going to show theirs in different ways. And I wanted to, of course, since we're here from through squash tigers, we want to talk about it in the squash setting so that it makes a little more sense. So label people player A and B, and these are real situations that have happened. Um, and the outcome didn't pan out well because of the competitive pressure they were feeling. So player A hasn't been playing well lately. Even if they've won a match, they're not really feeling as if they've done well. So a lot of people, base their performance off of performance instead of the outcome in squash. So even if they win, they don't think that they did all they could do. Um, and they're getting ready to play in a really important tournament, but they found out that the first person they're playing in that tournament is someone that they've played previously, and they've beaten them. They've beaten them clean out 3-0. And this is where people might think, okay, some parents and coaches might get a little comfortable and kind of wipe some sweat off their forehead. Like, thank God. This is actually the worst setting that a player could be in. Playing someone they've played previously is something that makes people feel a lot more pressure than you might think. So they're going back to how they played before. And if it's someone they know is a really good player or a friend of theirs or someone they played a lot, that's when that pressure and anxiety start to build up because they go, well, I beat them before. Coaches, oh, you beat them before. It's fine. You're going to beat them again. And that's where the anxiety comes from because then they start spinning out. Well, am I going to beat them again? What if I don't? Then everyone's going to be talking about how I didn't beat them again. And then the rating comes in where the player A is a higher rating than their opponent. And if they lose to them after beating them 3-0 before, it's something that people will talk about and they worry about things like that. So they go straight to the outcome. And that's where that pressure and anxiety starts to build up. So that situation is where I see a lot of parents or coaches or family members, friends say, you got this, it's fine, you've done it already. These are the worst situations for a lot of squash players to be in because of that expected outcome. And then moving on to player B has been on a great winning streak, had the best season they've ever had in their entire lives, their entire squash career. And the most important tournament of the season's coming up. And because of how great their season is and has been, their teammates and all their friends, their family, their coaches, everyone's coming to watch this last tournament because everyone thinks that player B is walking away with first seat plate, the first seat plate, they're walking away with it because they've had the best season ever. There's no one that can beat them. This is also not a great place for an athlete to be sometimes. Everyone's coming to watch you in this tournament because of the season you've had. You've been the talk of the town, the talk of the school, wherever the setting is, about how well you've been doing. And it's coming down to this big tournament where everyone is. There's all kind of players and from all over the country coming to this tournament. And everyone's expecting you to win. And you expect yourself to win because of how well you've been doing. But then the spinning out starts. Well, what if this is the one tournament? I've done all this work all season. What if this is the one time that I can't pull through? And I have all these people counting on me to pull through. I'm counting myself to pull through. So these are two different players where these are real situations that have happened. Obviously, for confidentiality, took out their names, player A and B. These are things that happened last year with two people who were on the same team, and they both had sadly poor outcomes because of that competitive pressure they were feeling, that anxiety to do well, and both of them expressed that they had a lot riding on this one tournament. They had people constantly come up to them telling them how well they had to do or they thought they were going to do, and it didn't help. And they expected themselves to do well. They didn't know how to deal with that. So they already went in losing basically because of that pressure they didn't know how to deal with. So I'm going to take everyone through a couple strategies that we can use, some mental tools that we can have in our back pocket to help us the athletes get through this competitive pressure and anxiety that they may be feeling prior to performance. So of course there's more than four, but these are ones that I know a lot of people look for something, a quick fix. These aren't quick fixes. These four I could talk about for hours. There is years and years, 20 plus years, more than that of research on just these four things. But these are four that I feel that I've seen work in real time rather quickly And with practice, they are the top ones that people usually revert to help handle pre-performance anxiety. So first one, imagery. Most people know what imagery is when they hear it. In a sports setting, just being able to visualize the successful outcomes of a performance. And there are two very big things when it comes to imagery. So you want to make sure that it's vivid and you want to make sure that it's deliberate. So just making sure that when you're saying vivid, you're using all your senses. So the player might be thinking of what the grip feels like, what the court smells like, what their feet feels like in their squash shoes. They may be thinking of going through hitting a certain shot or serving a certain way, right? So they're playing through a success, but you have to incorporate using those senses so that it feels as real as possible, so that we can mock success. And typically, the imagery is one that we'll get to pre-performance routines, one that people use right before they go on. It kind of helps to put them in a relaxation state and a focus state, be able to go through and create those scenarios for themselves. And then we'll move on to breathing. Breathing's the one that a lot of people run to first. Is what we all know how to do, but not a lot of people know how to breathe properly to put themselves in a relaxed state. So there's a bunch of different types of breathing. We have diaphragmatic, box breathing. The one that is the easiest to explain to a young athlete and to people who don't have a sports psych background is 4-7-8 breathing. 4-7-8 breathing is one where that you can go to in any setting, work or sports setting, and you can feel it work in real time. So I always have an athlete they right before they go on to a court or right after they do something that has their heart pumping, have them put their fingers on their pulse, whether it's their wrist or on their neck, and feel while they're going through it, they can feel their heart rate slow down so that you can feel the signs working in real time. And that's where that buy-in comes in because they can feel it working. So you'll inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. And typically that'll count for 1. So you'll do this about 4 times. And that is just to handle the anxiety and put you in a state of relaxation so that you can focus right before the match happens. And breathing is one that I teach to all my clients because everyone thinks they're breathing properly, but they're not. So box breathing is also one that is right after 4-7-8. That's very easy to learn. And when you're first learning how to breathe properly, we usually say you do it about 4 times, especially 4-7-8 breathing. And then once you practice and put it into a routine, we'll move on to about 8 times, about twice a day, depending on the situation and the sport they're playing. And then we'll move on to pre-performance routines. Pre-performance routines is something that all athletes should have in their back pocket, right? So it's just whatever you do before every match, for every tournament, competition, to put you in a ready state. So a state of readiness. And it'll trigger your brain to think, okay, we're going on now. We're about to play a match. We're about to get on the court. And it pumps the athlete up, gets them ready, and gets rid of the anxiety completely. So imagery is one that a lot of athletes use, especially squash players use right before a pre-performance routine. Right after imagery, you may see something like playlists. So you might see a lot of athletes, especially squash players, walking around with headphones on. And when creating a playlist, we want to make it intentional. We want to make it, again, deliberate. And you want songs that mean something to you, that pump you up, that remind you maybe of someone that puts you in a good place, someone you love. Songs that put you again in a state of readiness and make it a ritual. So the biggest thing about sports psych is some people might think they try something once and then think, well, that didn't work, and they move on. Something like, especially pre-performance routines, you have to make it a ritual. You have to do it constantly. You have to do it every single time because that will trick your brain into thinking, okay, right before we go into the court, this is what we do. This is what put us in a state of readiness. Let's go. And it'll start to come naturally. You'll start to calm down naturally. The anxiety will dissipate naturally once this becomes a ritual for the athlete. And lastly, positive self-talk. So self-talk is something that everyone does, whether they're aware of it or not. And a lot of us revert to negative self-talk, and it's just the conversations we have out loud or in our brain. And all squash players that I know have used self-talk out loud, and a lot of it's not positive, but I am a practitioner that embraces negative self-talk because there's truth in it, right? So instead of saying, let's stop using negative self-talk. I will instead say, let's check it. Let's check the negative thoughts, and then we'll add something positive at the end. So someone on court may say, that was a horrible shot. You might say, that's a horrible shot. What do I have to do instead? That was a horrible shot. I need to get my racket up earlier. So you're pairing the negative thoughts or the negative instruction with something positive at the end so that you're still being true to what you felt, but you're letting that negatively breathe a little bit so that you can move on from it. So any practitioner that's saying, let's just scrap the negative self-talk, which a lot do, it's not real, especially for a sport like squash where the mental part is just as big as the physical part. So someone just trying to completely ignore those negative thoughts, they're going to put themselves in a more stressed state. So you're just looking for those daily affirmations. And another part of the self-talk is something like you might do a recall cue. So some players that have right patience on their dominant hand. So when they go to serve, they see it and it puts them in a relaxed state. So someone might go through their pre-performance routine and get on court and they're still a little stressed out. And then they might need a little reminder to breathe. Someone might write it on their racket. Someone might write it on their, have people write them on the squash shoes. And it's another point of self-talk, right? So I've had people write, I've got this, and you tell yourself one point at a time. So these are just reinforcements and affirmations to encourage the athlete that, you know what, it's all right, because it's hard. They're on court. They can't turn their brain off. You can't turn your brain off on court unless you're one of the top players in the world and you're in a flow state. But, most of the players at Squash Tigers are not at a point where they can be in a flow state because they haven't been playing that long. They're not at that level where their body automatically does everything for them. And then we just wanted, so trial and error. So nothing is one size fit all. There's a million different techniques and strategies that a sports psychologist or sports psych consultant can take you through. But there has to be a certain level of buy-in from parents, from coaches, and from the athlete. So the buy-in comes in from the work. I have to do the work as a practitioner to sell it, and the athlete and the parent and the coach has to do the work to take it in. So the four different techniques that are given are ones that can work in real time, the ones that an athlete can start working on right now, tonight, and they might see some changes in a couple days. But doing it once and then moving on is not going to help elicit those positive changes. It has to be worked on. It has to be worked on, and the athlete needs support themselves, needs support from me as a practitioner, from the coaches and parents. And then just recognize that there are both physiological and psychological responses to competitive pressure. There's no one that's ever played any sport that can say that they've never felt that pressure before, but some people deal with it better than others. And squash is a sport where a lot of people get to a point where the better you are, the higher you're rated, the harder it is to deal with these pressures. So, and then we have the ones that are just starting, who are just getting into the tournament setting. And the ones that are just starting are in the same place as the ones who've been playing for a long time. They don't know what to do. So the mental piece starts to get a little bit more out of control. They've got their physical piece under control, but it needs to be a 50-50. It can't be 80% body and 20% mind. They have to meet in the middle. And that's where I come in. I give you tools to be able to have the brain and the body meet so that we can elicit positive change on and off court. And those are some sources that I gave you guys just in case you want to fact check or read up on your own. And I have a full booklet of other resources of anything that you may have questions on. And then, yeah, I think at this point, I'll just open it up to if anyone had any general questions about anything I shared, or I know a lot of people might have questions on how they can support the athlete in general.
Hey, Chad, it's just me. Oh, sorry. Jumped in front of somebody. No, whoever it was, go first.
Sorry. So my question was that you talked about managing stress before the match, but how about managing the stress after you lose a match or you lose a point? Because then it gets into it. Like there are players who get into a state where even if the other opponent is up by 1 point, they feel a lot of pressure. What do you do then?
So the question was after the match is over, right?
Either during the match when the opponent is like a couple of points above you, how do you manage the pressure at that point, or after you lose a match? Both those times.
Yeah, so mentioned that was a good question, thank you. Mentioned a little bit before about those performance cues. So during a match, those people who still might feel a little stressed, depending on what the score is, or they're feeling that they're not doing well enough performance-wise, those reset cues, like looking at words that they've written down, or some people have a thing where they'll tap their leg a couple times and it reminds them to breathe, to settle down. So and listening, adding in some of those things. So I always preach first and foremost the self-talk, talking yourself through the match, and then also the performance cues. So I have a lot of people just simply write breathe on their racket or on their shoe so they can look at it, or write it on their hand right here so they can see it when they go to serve. So those things are that can help them reset during the match and get rid of some of those stressors. After the match, I always say it happened, the outcome happened, whether it was good or it's bad, you reflect on it. So some people think because if they won, they did great, they just go home and go to sleep. No, you reflect no matter what. So any client that I work with, I give them a journal, and you have to be as honest as you can be with yourself in that journal, and go through what happened. Go through game one, two, three. If there was five, go through all 5 games. Obviously, list 3 things you did well, list 3 things you think you needed to work on. There's always a positive and a negative that happened in a match, no matter what the outcome was. It could be something simple as, um, well, I had my racket up. Could have lost 11-0 in 3 games. It could be something positive like that. So reflection's always the biggest thing at the end of a match. And then before the next match, some people like to go back and reread that when they're at home before they go to the next tournament, to remind themselves, this is where I was last time. Let's see where I can be this time. So after a match, the biggest thing is just to reflect and give yourself grace, right? So not enough athletes have patience for them with themselves, and that's what we're trying to get first and foremost, them to give themselves grace and have patience with the process. So those would probably be the 2 things during the match. Try to get some of those performance cues going, that self-talk going, and then after the match, you need to reflect. So if they don't like writing in a journal, at least talk it out with someone, a parent, or just reflect on your own in bed. Go through the match again in your head. If you have to look at the scores, so some people look at the scores and they remember what it was like in those certain moments during those scores. Did that help answer your question?
Yes, a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was just making sure I didn't interrupt anyone that time. Is there a difference working with different ages of kids? So, say under 11s, under 15s, under 17s. What's your experience of that, and how does that work out for you?
The shocking answer is yes and no. So, depending on exactly.
That's always the best answers.
Exactly. So even I get this question a lot. So this is the most asked question I get is, well, how different is it working between levels and experience? And it depends on what we're talking about. So something like pre-performance anxiety or pressure or stress kind of depends on a few things, right? So it depends on the level they're playing at. And I would say someone who's just starting is going through the same things as someone who's been playing for most of their life. It's people in the middle that kind of going through different things. So you have to put in where they are in school. And this is sports psych, so you may think, well, that doesn't matter. Outside personal things always affect what's going on court. So some people might be at a stage where they're worried about SATs or graduation or college. Are they going to get recruited? So those things affect what's going on course. People might be feeling that pressure to do well because they have recruiters that they're trying to impress. And then I might have an 8-year-old who just started a month ago who might be feeling embarrassed because they feel like they're on court with people or hanging around people who've been hitting for years and they can barely get the ball back. And so they're feeling anxious because they're embarrassed. And then people who are just going into their first tournament, they may be feeling a little bit of that. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm in front of a bunch of people that I know. I want to impress myself. I want to impress my parents. And depending on if it's something that they love or something they're just getting into, you typically be able to tell by their reaction to the wins or the losses. So, well, a long-winded answer to yes and no. It's so much the same, but there's so much difference. The people in the middle who've been maybe playing for a couple years, who are maybe in the middle range from maybe like, 3.5 to maybe a 4 point something, they are trying to find their place in the sport. So they're playing with people who are some of the best in the country, and they're also playing with people who just started yesterday. So they are worried about proving themselves, and those are the ones that you typically see that come into that competitive pressure of they end up playing someone who they played a million times because a lot of them play each other a lot, and sometimes they beat them, sometimes they don't. And the ones that beat someone a lot of times or their best friends, they're the ones that tend to crumble the fastest because they expect something out of themselves. Their parents expect something, and their coaches, whether the coaches tell them or not, the athlete can tell that the coaches expect them to beat someone, or and they just get a pound of back and that was okay, or we'll do better next time. So, I hope that answered your question, Paul. It's simply just yes and no.
Yeah, it depends. Is always the best answer. No, thanks, coach. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have time for if anyone has one or two more questions. All right. Like I said at the beginning, this will be uploaded so anyone can go back. I think Paul's going to upload it to the Squash Tigers YouTube page, and we'll have more of these. And I'm sure it's on the website, but I will drop my email in the chat just in case anyone has any questions. If anyone wants me to send them any references, I have a whole booklet full of references for anything you may have questions about. And I am also seeing people now. So if anyone wants to email me about having a consultation with any of the players, I am open to doing that. You can email me or Paul, me and or Paul, and we can set something up. Let me drop that in the chat. And I want to thank you guys again for taking the time out to hear me spiel about sports psych.
Awesome. Thanks, coach.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rest of your night.